Welcome to the Republican Professor. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. It is Wednesday, October 9th, 2024, years after Jesus. And we're coming at you again with Helmut Thielicke's Theological Ethics, Politics. This is the second volume, and it discusses, well, a lot of his reflections on National Socialism and Communistic Socialism, both of which destroyed his country. He was, for many years, professor in West Germany, I think last at the University of Hamburg, and he had two doctorates. He was an incredibly well-educated guy. He had a doctorate in philosophy, a doctorate in theology, and of course, he watched the National Socialists, sometimes called Nazis. He watched them take over. Then after World War II, after we kicked the Nazis back to the Stone Age, uh, we had a deal with the devil with Stalin where something like a third of the country was taken by the communists, and that became East Germany. Hamburg, where he taught at the end of his life, was in the west part of Germany, as you know. But he had opportunity to reflect deeply about the relationship between theology and politics as a Christian. And he was deeply concerned about socialism, the allure of totalitarian forms of government. Of course, they didn't have separation of church and state. They didn't have separation of powers like we have in in the late 1800s in Germany when the rise to German power and unification began the events of the 1900s. So he's not speaking from the American ethnic identity of separation of powers and the constitutional limitation on government, where the people are sovereign and they express their sovereignty through the written constitution. That would be an American ethnic way of looking at things. I don't mean American in terms of race. I don't mean American necessarily even in terms of nationality, because a lot of people have this ethnic way of looking at government even before they come to the United States. That's why they want to come here, because it's like they've already been adopted into that way of thinking and they desire and thirst for it. Of course, the problem is when you have a bunch of migrants who come here and they don't share that vision of America and they want to undermine it and destroy it, then that's a recipe for conflict and disaster. Well, anyway, we want to thank Fortress Press for making this material available. Go to fortresspress.com and look at their wonderful selection. I would highly suggest that you purchase the book. I got my copy at Old Capitol Books in Monterey on Alvarado Street. It's up the stairs across from Nick the Greek restaurant. And it's a professor that runs it, professor at Monterey Peninsula College, where I went to school. And yeah, get a copy. Thank you, Fortress Press. And they have a wonderful selection of other materials, other books. So we're really grateful for Fortress Press. We're going to make a fair use of this material. We're going to do a transformative, performative reading, and we're going to have commentary and reflection on American politics as we go through. So here's Helmut Thielicke. What a name, huh? Um, this is page 38. The last one we did was Ideology as a Means to Rule. This is the claim to absoluteness, and we're going to do science and ideology. And these are short sections, so this will be relatively short today. And what we have to look forward to next time is reflection on the relationship between ideology and law. Ooh, and ideology as idolatry. Oh my goodness. This is great stuff. Great stuff. I really wish that we had this kind of theological reflection, the quality and depth in our churches here, and we just don't seem to have that. Of course, he's a rare bird, so maybe I'm just complaining about something I shouldn't be complaining about, but let's continue. The claim to absoluteness. It is now evident why every ideology must involve, at least implicitly, the claim to absoluteness. If it seeks to master the whole man, it can brook no rivals. Hence, it does not discuss with opponents. It does away with them. Does that sound familiar or what? You know, here in California, the Democrat will not debate the Republican. That would be to acknowledge, in their words, that would be to acknowledge the humanity of the Republican. So they dehumanize the Republican, and it's a claim to absolute power over California for statewide offices. And it's not just statewide offices. I saw it firsthand because I helped to moderate a debate here in Orange County for the Orange County Sheriff in 2018. I have photographs. Guess who showed up? Dave Harrington, Don Barnes, who ended up winning. And where was the Democrat? They were both Republicans. Where's the Democratic candidate? He didn't even show up. You know why? They don't want to debate. Now, Kamala and what's that guy's name? Tim, the vice president candidate right now. They ended up debating because there's a threat that they would lose. But if they feel like they have it down, they won't debate. They're not interested in hearing from people that disagree with them unless there's a chance they won't win. So their strategy generally is to lock down the win through systematic means, censorship, other structural things, lawfare, gag orders, um, other things I won't mention, probably illegal things, and structure the next election to where they will definitely win. Right now, FEMA is not helping people in red states. In fact, it's arresting people that are trying to help during an election. The election is ongoing right now. One political party controls the government that manages federal emergencies and is blocking help. That fits in exactly with what Thielicke is saying here. It does not discuss with opponents. It does away with them. This points to a dialectical relation between power and ideology. Ideology has to validate the will to power, to buttress it, as it were, with supporting arguments. On the other hand, ideology itself needs power so that it will not have to discuss with, and in doing so, recognize its ideological rivals, but can simply destroy them. This is how you get one party rule in California and they want to do it to the United States, the entire country. They want to Californianize the entire country. This is how North Korea gets entire control over half of the Korean peninsula. It's one political party. It's not one political party in South Korea. It's not one political party in Taiwan. You know that, right? Tell me you know that. Leftists always want one party rule. There was only one party in the Soviet Union. There's only one in China. There's only one in Cuba. There's only one in Venezuela that can actually win. Got to start paying attention, people. There was only one political party in the South during slavery and after Reconstruction, which was exhausting, and Republicans ended up having to give up on that. The Democrats were too powerful. Ideology dare not let itself be called in question, for it would thereby lose its force and fall apart. Fascinating thing to say there. Helmut. Speaking truth destroys it. That's why you got to speak truth. You got to have courage. That's why they want to censor truth. What is truth? We just covered that on the Republican Professor podcast 2 episodes ago. The correspondence theory of truth is the common sense view of truth, that truth is what is the case. When you say what is the case, when what you say corresponds with what is the case, your statement is true. Let's continue. Ideology dare not let itself be called in question, for it would thereby lose its force and fall apart. This is why it must crush everything that challenges it. It therefore not only serves power, but also uses power to stamp out opposition. Democrats control the vast majority of college campuses. How do you think that is? And then the clients, the clientele, including parents, have been just somehow culturally brainwashed. And I use that term advisedly because I'm stretching the term, admittedly, to include just being lazy and thinking, well, laziness is a fine in this context, in an educational context. It's so bizarre that so many people, tens of millions of people, would think the Democrats entirely having a lockdown on 90% of college campuses is a good thing for a learning experience. And now you're seeing it's a disaster. The Atlantic just came out with an article. These so-called elite students, they can't even read a book. I just did another episode. It's going to be posting soon on grade inflation. It's entirely corresponded, it's entirely correlated with Democrat control of college campuses at taxpayer expense. Higher education is a Democrat indoctrination, grade inflation, plantation at taxpayer expense. How did they get that kind of control? It's been disastrous. It's led to incredibly horrific political polarization in our country. When Republican parents are sending their kids to the same schools as Democrats, but only one party, the Democrats, control that learning experience where they're just being grade inflated and taught to be lazy. You might think, well, how can being lazy lead to being a Democrat? Well, because as soon as you start teaching these kids how to think well, they have a lot more respect for the Republican position. They take it more seriously, and many of them become Republicans. In my experience, just getting students to slow down and examine slogans was itself evidence to many of them that I was a Republican, because Democrats don't examine slogans. Republicans do. We think critically and carefully about things in the present context. That's my experience. What's been your experience? Has it been different? I have gum in my mouth, so I'm taking my gum out. This is why political ideologies, by their very nature, are linked with terror. Indeed, this is what distinguishes ideologies from matters of real conviction. For convictions necessarily expose themselves to challenges. They are strengthened when they lift the drawbridge and allow their opponents to enter. The man of conviction gains independence precisely through standing against something. Through opposition, he becomes what he is. This, the champion of an ideology never does. He refuses to derive his very being from resistance to a challenge. He cannot let an opponent come near him. Man, this is exactly describing Democrats. Just look at Kavanaugh hearing day one. Make sure you get the whole thing. The very beginning. Just look for 30, 40 seconds. Chuck Grassley begins speaking, and in that hearing, I saw something I've never seen before. He's interrupted immediately by Democrats who start screeching like demons. They don't even let him finish his first paragraph. I think he's interrupted his first sentence or two. Contrast that with the Gorsuch hearing or any other hearing. You never see Republicans doing that. It's all Democrats. By the way, it was Kamala Harris that was interrupting Chuck Grassley. And she was joined by a cadre of ridiculous protesters in the Senate chamber there, the Senate room for the committee hearing. The Gorsuch hearing, by contrast, was very calm. What was different between Kavanaugh and Gorsuch? It's not because anybody thought he was a sexual abuser. Those allegations had not been made public. Nobody knew about them besides Dianne Feinstein, allegedly, and the lady that made them up. Maybe a couple staffers, but it was not public knowledge. The protesters weren't really protesting about that. Kamala Harris didn't know about it, at least according to Dianne Feinstein. So what was the interruption about? Well, he was the fifth vote, number 5. That's something Democrats are good at. No matter how grade inflated they are, they're very good at seeing any challenge to their attempt at complete control over the whole country. Because they're like China. They're like North Korea. They want total control for generations. Just like the universities, they want total control, total power, even though it destroys the whole thing. The man of conviction gains independence precisely through standing against something. Through opposition, he becomes what he is. This, the champion of an ideology never does. He refuses to derive his very being from resistance to a challenge. He cannot let an opponent come near him. Conviction aims at true existence, ideology at mere functioning. Conviction creates persons, Ideology depersonalizes. Conviction lets the other be an end in himself. There's the language from Kant. Ideology makes him a means and an object. The man of conviction asks, what is truth? Or what is true, I should say. The victim of ideology asks, how am I influenced and how can I influence others? Ideology asserts itself, therefore, by silencing its opponents. Says it right there. This guy lived through the Nazis and communists. You understand that? Where the communists had total control for decades. It was only when a Republican, like working with some Democrats like Scoop Jackson, for example, Ronald Reagan. Great movie, by the way. I should do a review of that movie. It's only when that happened, when the Republicans with good Democrats stood up against this, Reagan said, tear down this wall. And it was torn down. Praise God. I think Germany has quite a bit of work ahead of it. But don't we all? Ideology asserts itself, therefore, by silencing its opponents, even liquidating them completely. Truth, on the other hand, asserts itself by persuading others. I wish he was a little bit more careful epistemologically there, because truth is expressed in evidence, and those are two concepts that need to be distinguished. Truth and evidence, they're not the same thing. Truth, on the other hand, asserts itself by persuading others. Ideology will not permit the kind of division which truth allows. Goebbels' practice of cutting off all discussion at party meetings right after the main speech shows that while ideology may disguise itself as truth, it is, in fact, only a form of the expression of power. The ideological tyrant must inevitably construe every alternative claim to truth, e.g., the expression of a different view, not as a position to be refuted, but as an enemy to be suppressed. That's exactly what's happening on college campuses with anything that deviates from Democrat control. If the force of an intellectually or spiritually based claim to truth is to be blunted, it has to be refuted. But a dynamic, and this is how ideology necessarily regards the opposing claim to truth, can only be destroyed or, once I am exposed to it, suppressed. It is well known, however, that acts of suppression do not overcome the thing to be suppressed. They actually preserve it by forcing it down into deeper levels of the psyche, where it hibernates as in a state of incubation until such time as it is convenient to emerge and become active again. Well, I would disagree with them on that. On page 39 at the top. Acts of suppression do not overcome the thing to be suppressed. I actually disagree with that. I think I agree with him that it forces it down into the psyche, and that's its own damage. I disagree that it's not suppressed. It is for decades. That's why they're able to maintain control of college campuses. They suppress. That's why they want to censor. They suppress. Thank God for Elon Musk buying Twitter. Holy cow. I thank God. Can you imagine if that Jack guy that Democrat was still with his Democrat buddies suppressing truth? It'd be horrible right now. It still is horrible, but it'd be way worse. This is perhaps the basic reason, though it is not usually thought out by without any clarity, why the ideologist cannot allow his opponent to speak, why he silences or even kills him. The category of the dynamic under which all claims to truth are subsumed does not allow for an individual to have any convictions of his own. And I'm seeing this from my students. They will mouth the slogans, you know, they will use the words they think they're supposed to use, at least today. Even a little pushback, getting them to think about their positions, they start to crumble very quickly because they're not built on anything. This is the weakness of the Democrat control on campus. They encourage grade inflation, which actually undercuts their indoctrination program. That's how stupid these people are. And it creates stupidity in the student and the voter and the cultural elite that go on to just flash their credentials as if it means something any more than I was grade inflated. How are you? I was indoctrinated and grade inflated. How are you? I've never heard a Republican before on campus. How are you? Consequently, an opposing view or claim cannot be overcome by way of existential persuasion, but only by suppression. As the dynamistic ideologist sees it, the appeal to conscience, existence, and conviction can lead only to pathological states of weakness. In other words, to a state of tension whereby a man is involved in conflict with himself instead of mobilizing all his forces for the external conflict. We're now, by the way, when he's quoting Goebbels, he's quoting the German 1936 Kampf um Berlin because he's reading the primary sources. It's not just bloviate. He's not reading Wikipedia. The next section is called Science and Ideology. And if you thought that this has nothing to do with what we've been going through, well, I got some land in Florida I would love to sell you. It's a couple feet underwater. It's about 13 miles off the coast. I'll give you a great price on it. Thank you for joining me on the Republican Professor podcast. We'll see you next time.